welcome everybody to another developer interview here on the Perceptive podcast series and for Game Wisdom, where you examine the art and science of games. As always, if you are a developer working on an upcoming game or just want to talk game dev, I'm always looking for guests, so feel free to reach out. My guest tonight is a sole developer from the studio Moon Soul Games. They currently have a game on Steam, Grand Soul Story, and they're here to talk about it as well as any other topics that will pop up. So, please welcome to the podcast, Jeremy Reineck. How are you doing?
Hey, hey man, thanks for having me on. Doing well. It's nice to have an opportunity to talk about the game. A little bit of a background on it. It's kind of a Super Nintendo inspired JRPG. I think the inspiration came from two games, Final Fantasy VI in terms of the presentation, kind of the turn-based thing, and some of the old school charm, I guess, of a Super Nintendo game, and some of the design of the game was inspired by Baldur's Gate 2. I'm not saying my game is like Baldur's Gate 2 or Final Fantasy VI, but that's where the inspiration came from. Baldur's Gate 2, inspired the design in the sense of kind of a non-linear sort of narrative. There are sort of story beats, that might take you to the next area, but a lot of it's about being in this very kind of open space. I love the city in that game. You can kind of go to any nook and cranny, and there's something interesting going on there. So I designed the game in that way to that the player can make choices about what they want to do or not do. You can kind of make your money just playing blackjack, or you can do all these different sort of missions and different things. So the sort of synopsis of the story is you're kind of a low level guard in this kingdom called Harana, and there's a military coup there, and you sort of escape with your life, and you're thrust into this pretty crappy sort of dystopian crumbling city called DuPont, and there's a lot of issues going on there. There's two drug epidemics. There's kind of a harsh regime that's cracking down on people. There's a civil war going on, and I think I always like the idea of you not necessarily being some big hero that saves the world, but you're just a person passing through. You're a refugee. You're trying to find your way, basically, to get to the other side of the city and move on to Yerdan, and that's another city where your family is. So you're trying to reconnect with your family. So that's kind of the synopsis. I'm a musician creatively, and I'm hugely inspired by Nobuo Uematsu, the composer for Final Fantasy. So I composed the score for the game, and so that was definitely one of the main aims, is to enhance the storytelling with the music, even though it's this very simple presentation. So I think that's maybe a good start. Yeah.
All right. So, with Grand Soul Story, is this like your first commercial project, or have you worked on other games?
No, this is my first commercial project. I don't have a background in game design necessarily. I'm in grad school to become a mental health counselor. But that said, I put something close to 3,000 or 4,000 hours into the game, just because I love video games so much. They're have been such a huge part of my life, and I think some of the most enjoyable artistic experiences for me have been playing video games, really, in terms of being immersed in a story, uh, you know, experiencing another world. It just has captured my imagination since I was a little kid, and uh, so I think there was a really strong latent desire in me to create a game. So that's where it came from.
So, what kind of attracted you to working on like a JRPG style game as like your first title?
I love sort of the storytelling focus, I think, of RPGs. It's very much about like talking to people and being immersed in a place. Obviously, you can achieve that in other types of genres, but I think it just lends itself really well to that, to lots of dialogue, interaction, lots of choices. Um, and I think maybe most importantly, I made the game on RPG Maker because I'm a first time developer. And so that just sort of lent itself well to working on a JRPG, obviously. But I think that's the game I would have wanted to make regardless.
Hmm. As a sole developer, did you use a RPG Maker or another engine for the game?
RPG Maker, yeah. Mhm.
And how was it like as like your first game, like using that as like the engine itself?
I mean, yeah, it's obviously user friendly, but it's not coding. That coding is not not my strength. you know, I think I was just trying to work to my strengths, which is I was an English major in college, so I have experience with writing um, and I'm a musician, so I used the program um, mostly so that I could kind of commit as much time and effort into those strengths as opposed to trying to learn coding, which is just something have zero knowledge about, and I'm not really inclined towards just in terms of how my brain works. So um, I think that's the reason I chose it.
Mhm. And kind of like with like RPG design, again, like I've played so many of them. One of my not the book that I just finished, but the book before that was on RPG design, just
Uh,
on specifically JRPG and CRPG. Like again, there's like 10 different variants or subgenres
yeah,
of
yeah,
it,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I guess like with like JRPG design, how like anything that you did like different or anything that you really wanted to focus on in terms of like combat, leveling, progression with Grand Soul.
I think of the feedback that I've gotten for the game, and it's an ongoing. I'm making updates all the time. That the game was too difficult, so I had to go back and kind of rebalance things. Um, I think the approach I wanted to take is a game where you feel really weak in the beginning. I love those games where you just feel totally kind of overpowered, and then throughout the story, you gain more power, and you can go back to an area and kick somebody's ass who was kicking your ass at the beginning of the game. I love that kind of experience. Um, yeah, it's I played Octopath Traveler 2, and I based a lot of the mechanics off of that because I thought that was a really solid. It was just a solid turn-based combat system that was doable within the engine that I was using. So it's pretty obviously inspired by that. Yeah.
And in terms of development, like how long did it take you to build the game?
Um, I, I think about a year and a half, 2 years, somewhere around there, and yeah, and that's kind of like thinking about it all the time and working on it every spare moment that I had. Yeah.
Now, one thing, like obviously with a lot of these interviews, like do I talk to a lot of developers with like programming backgrounds, art backgrounds, but it's rare for me to talk to someone with a background in music or who did like the music for their games. So
Mhm.
I guess for you, Jeremy, like obviously you've done music or you've done stuff non-video game related. How was it like designing or composing the music for the Grand Soul Story versus just like I guess like general where you or you do otherwise with a
Mhm.
composition or composing?
Yeah, I think that was one of the most rewarding parts of the development for me was uh, for lack of a better phrase, just like creating a vibe. You have a sewer, you have the graphics, you have the whatever characters to talk to in this area. You have some sound effects and stuff. And then but the music is so powerful, and I think I think for me it's because I grew up in an era where the graphics were still kind of janky. Like Final Fantasy 6 and 7, Final Fantasy 9, Baldur's Gate 2. I personally like that graphical. I like those. I like the graphics in those games, but there was a lot of heavy lifting done in terms of the emotion emotional content of the scene by the music. Um, they can't. There's no facial expression for the characters. There's no. It's very limited. So I think I was so excited about that. That okay, here's a scene, like there's a scene where one of the characters can get sober. You can get one of the sort of central characters sober or not. But if you do, she goes to this rehab, and you have to like go around the rehab and use the amenities and stuff. And so I wanted this kind of tender and nostalgic piece of music to kind of capture this experience for her. But if you're just looking at it, it's just a little sprite kind of walking around this sort of area, hotel looking kind of area. But I think with the music, it really elevates it and makes it. But what I worked to do. That'll have to be obviously the gamer has the last word. But that's what I was trying to achieve, is to kind of elevate the emotions of a scene just using the music and some very simple graphics.
All right. And to go back to what you were saying earlier about like kind of the game being considered too difficult, that's like one of like the more interesting parts, especially about like RPG design, because it's all abstracted base. It's all just about kind of like the numbers on the back end.
Yeah,
and one of the things I just find very fascinating is like how much like if you've heard the game Fear and Hunger, that's kind of blown up. Like I remember that game was just like this unknown little thing, no one's ever played it, and it really blew up over the last year, and it is just brutally difficult.
Yeah.
And it's very hard, I think, to kind of like balance between like getting someone to play something that's like very brutally difficult and designing it so that people will kind of get into it. So I guess with Grand Soul Story, like what was like kind of like the adjustments, or like what was some like the feedback in terms of like difficulty that you took to heart with it?
I mean, I think just making the beginning a little bit more approachable. I think like even the first battle was kind of difficult. I guess I justified that from a development standpoint. Like you want to reinforce the feeling that you're kind of a weak person that's just in this place. You have no idea what's going on in this city. It's not like you're some badass warrior. You're just like a freaking castle guard. That's the character. So I kind of wanted to reinforce that feeling of smallness and weakness and being a fish out of water, because that's sort of the story of the main character. And I really like when the storytelling, or the sort of the vision or the story the game is trying to tell, or the experience it's trying to give the player is congruent all the way through. And I think in a game like Fear and Hunger, the world is terrifying and brutal and bleak, right? And the fact that if the game was easy, it would be like, well, this doesn't really line up, But the fact that not only is the world like the most horrific place you've ever been, but the combat will kick your ass, and you're gonna like lose a limb permanently, like that kind of those choices. I love that game design, because it all fits together. It all makes sense together, and it emphasizes the vision of the developer that I think they were going for.
And like trying to like get like that feeling across that the player is weak, that your character's supposed to be weak, is sometimes, again, it's like very easy for people to think, well, start a battle, guy gets hit one time, lose 99% of my health, I can't do anything, game is too difficult, move on. And like onboarding is such a very important aspect of this, and good tutorials. So as you were saying earlier, like, you were inspired obviously by a lot of JRPGs. You play Octopath Traveler 2. I guess in terms of like progression, or kind of like the pacing of the game, what did you kind of like took to heart with Grand Soul?
From other games?
Yeah, and like kind of what you wanted to have in a Grand Soul Story.
Yeah, to be completely honest, Path Traveler 2, I'm not a huge fan of the pacing of the combat, because I feel like there's just a lot of random battles, and some of them kind of take a while. So yeah, actually, in my game, there's no random battles because I just don't like I don't like random battles too much. There's optional battles and stuff, but um, yeah, I'm trying to think of like, man, what's the game that just has the best combat? Uh, I would put it back to you, man. I don't know what do you think like in terms of just that classic turn-based ATV RPG? What do you?
And like for me, like I think I may be similar to like I'm not a huge fan these days of like very traditional JRPG design. Random encounters are definitely like poison to me now. I'd rather have it be like fixed battles, or at least I can see the enemies on the map.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Like stopping and starting for a random battle every 5 feet has just gotten really old for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
But yeah,
yeah.
like active time battle, like I haven't trying to think if there's anything like new because that system again was like really big with like Final Fantasy VI, like the 16-bit era, and then
Yeah.
I've seen like a few indie developers who have used like something similar to that in the past, but
Yeah.
it has really like gone away. I think it kind of plays, and as a fan of JRPGs, I'm curious what you think. And for people watching this recorded, like I think there's always been this economy between people who want like the real time aspect and people who want the
Hmm.
turn based aspect. And
Hmm.
when you try to combine them both, I think it can tend to like rub people the wrong way. I've seen this with a lot of like strategy games or even some CRPGs. Like if anyone, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with the term, real time with pause, where you can
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of pause and issue commands and it
yeah.
goes real time. And I think like for me, like I'd rather it be like all real time or all turn based, but the combination
Hmm.
just always feels a little awkward to me.
Yeah, I haven't played the new Final Fantasy VII. Have you had a chance to play it?
No, I played the demo like
Yeah.
wow, like many years ago at this point.
Yeah, I don't find myself too drawn towards it for the same reason. It's just I kind of want one or the other. If it's gonna be like really about reflex and stuff, I just want to play Dark Souls. I just want to like really master a real time combat system. But if it's turn based, it's about the strategy and it's like chess. You're kind of
Mhm.
making choices about what you do one thing at a time, and um, I'm not sure how compatible those things are together because they're just design wise they're going in opposite directions, right?
Mhm.
Um,
So I guess
yeah, I
like
haven't
oh,
I haven't played a lot of the kind of modern JRPGs. I know Square is trying to do that with like every game now.
mhm.
It has to be Devil May Cry and it has to be old school Final Fantasy at the same time. I haven't played those games, so I don't know, but I just don't find myself super drawn towards it.
Mhm. And speaking about kind of like modern games, I'm curious like have you played like any like modern like CRPGs, Witcher, Fallout, Cyberpunk, stuff like that?
I haven't. I've just played the kind of throwback ones like I'm forgetting the name right now. Pillars of Eternity. I,
Mhm.
I liked the second one. That was a good CRPG. First one was a little less polished maybe than that one, but it was good too.
Mhm.
Yeah, The Witcher. Obviously, like that was the game of the century for a lot of people, but I actually had trouble getting into it. I have to give it another fair shot because I know there's some games I've started haven't been super interested in.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I think again it has to go back to that idea that if I'm playing a real time game, I want it to be like more action focused. Like give me like a
yeah,
Neo,
yeah,
Dark Souls, Hero.
yeah,
Like if you tell
yeah,
me it's real time, but then but you can't dodge until you unlock the dodge skill, or your
yeah,
sword
yeah,
still misses even if you swing it. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
it kind of just
yeah,
like it doesn't feel right to me.
yeah.
And I
Hmm.
think it's kind of like funny like, about like how much like my taste in RPG design has really changed over like the
Hmm.
past. I would say maybe past decade, really. Like playing more like non-traditional RPGs again, like Fear and Hunger, Shin Megami Tensei, like games where they're clearly trying to do something different. And I think to go back to what you're saying about like Square Enix, like Square has always been like a very like prolific when it comes to their RPGs. Like they've always been kind of like trying to push things forward. And again, like many RPG fans consider like the '90s and maybe '90s early 2000s like Square's Soft. I gotta make that distinction, of course, to be kind of
Yeah,
like the pinnacle of like the JRPG design. And like we've seen a lot of interesting like evolutions of RPG, not only on the JRPG side, but even on CRPG. So obviously, as we're recording this in early April, Baldur's Gate 3 is still being talked about, and it will probably be like I would assume it's going to be like the banner CRPG for maybe who knows, maybe for the next like 3 to 4 years at this point. Like I don't think anyone else is going to be able to top that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like I guess with like JRPG design, it's been kind of like in this weird place because again, you have on one side like the major studios, Team Ninja, Square Enix, and so on, more embracing like action focused design, making more ARPG, while a lot of the indie developers have really gone back to like the 8-bit, 16-bit route. I mean,
yeah, yeah.
again, there is an infinite number of RPG Maker games on itch. We're seeing more on Steam. I was trying to think. I mean, we're even seeing classic CRPGs being like, or
Yeah,
CRPG Imagine classic games being released on
yeah, yeah,
Steam.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's kind of funny how much like the indie scene has really been like doing more in like this kind of design. So
Mhm.
I guess to go back to a Grand Soul Story, was there like anything that you really wanted to put in like mechanical wise to the game that you either hadn't really seen before or something you just felt like really would like make this game stand out compared to like the other JRPGs?
Something that I would have wanted to, or something that I did put in.
Let's do something that you did, and then we'll go with like what you
Okay.
wish you, or what you wanted.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty Octopath Traveler. I mean, there's a boost system. Um, there's skills. Some of the it's definitely like a class-based game. It's not like each character has a thing that they do, and they just gain skills along what they do. And that was inspired by FF9. I liked that it was kind of that old school class-based system. Each character did a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the alchemist, which is just a sort of a priest, basically, is low health, basically zero attack, but can do kick-ass damage, but you have to. Yeah, there's boost, there's elemental weakness. I used to have a real time thing where like, uh, if you hit attack, there would be a kind of a real time or what do you call it, active time event or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You have to click it in the middle to get at maximum points, like Legend of Dragoon. But
Mm.
people hated that, so I took it out. It was like too much of a chore.
And I think again goes back to the whole like real time versus
Exactly.
turn based thing.
Exactly. I think
I
yeah. I think
Yeah, like I think for me, like you would think, like for people watching, like as someone who's more action oriented, I would love to have that. But I just
hmm
find it sometimes like if, especially in random encounters, like if I have to be
hmm
focusing on QTEs,
yeah,
every
QT.
20 seconds, or an action command, like I think it's either one or the other. It
hmm
just kind of like it really slows things down, especially if it's like one of those cases where if you hit the action command, you do like 70 points of damage. If you miss the action command, you do 5. So
Yeah, yeah.
it just can
It's
get
just
like,
like all this extra work.
mm-hmm,
Yeah, that's you're already dealing with the strategy element, and then to add that is kind of it's a lot.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. I think the thing I did in the game that is kind of minor but unique maybe is that a lot of the game is about this drug epidemic, and you
mm-hmm,
can use these drugs, but any of those options, they're going to give you a boost in a certain. There's HP, AP, and TP. There's basically three
mm-hmm.
different parameters, and a lot of the items will like boost one thing but lower another thing because it's a drug and it's bad for you, but it might give you a temporary boost.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe that's the most unique thing. Otherwise, it's kind of standard. I just tried to make it sort of like snappy turn-based combat to the best of my ability, and um, yeah, something I've been working on more lately. The more feedback I get is just I want it to be a game where it's kind of battle is kind of risky, where it's like both sides hit pretty hard. So if you make a mistake, the enemy will take you down, but you also can do a lot of damage and take them down quickly. So I wanted to have those kind of sort of quick, risky battles. That was the flavor I was going for.
Hmm. I think a lot of that, like we've been seeing more developers kind of embrace like low number philosophy, like something out of
Yeah,
tabletop games, where again we're not
yeah,
talking about you having 67 trillion points of health. You may have
yeah.
40,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and like for me, again, like I think I'm definitely gravitating more towards kind of like modern or I think more like approachable or more streamlined RPGs these days than I would in the past. Again, I think part of it is just the time commitment. There's
A lot of time.
again,
Yeah.
you're talking to someone who has a backlog. I think this time over like 1,000 games at this point. Games at
Oh
some point
Jesus.
maybe I'll get to. So
Yeah.
even just like
So many
spending,
games, so little time.
yeah, on top of writing, doing videos, and all the others. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a very peaceful time
Yeah.
here. And I guess
Yeah.
like with a Grand Soul Story, like in terms of length, I was looking on the store page. So you mentioned you have like multiple endings you can go for. Like how long, like would you say like a typical playthrough of the game is?
I mean, it depends on what you do. Yeah, yeah, I mean, there are some story beats you have to hit to get to the next sections, but I tried to make it that there was a lot of optional content. Again, I love that about Baldur's Gate 2 is that you can go somewhere and talk to like some dude in an alleyway, and then it'll take you on some insane adventure, like that has nothing to do with the story. I just love that philosophy that there's a lot of like depth to all the nooks and crannies. So I tried to design it like that. Obviously, I'm one person, and there's a certain limit to that. But in terms of the length, I would say probably 30 to 40 hours, depending on how you play it. Um, I have a friend who's like 20 hours in, and he's less than halfway through the game. So for him, it might be longer, but other friends, it depends on maybe how accustomed you are to JRPGs and turn-based combat and stuff, and it might be a little quicker
Hmm.
if you are familiar. But
And
yeah, I tried to design it with density in mind. That it's a dense world. There's a lot going on. If you poke your nose into different areas, and something cool will happen.
mhm.
Um, yeah,
And from what you were saying earlier about like design, like the characters is like each being kind of like an individual, like one off, rather than like
yeah,
swapping between classes and stuff like that. I think for me, like I do enjoy like a good job system in games. Like, it's just
hmm
again like I really like party management, building like the perfect party. In
yeah,
terms
yeah.
of a Grand Soul Story, in terms like with like character designs or character skill design, I should say. How did you want to approach, I guess, like what each character can do? Like, did you pay like any special attention to, making sure like something wasn't like too powerful or too weak, stuff like that?
Yeah. I think the coolest thing I did in the game in terms of the battle system is one of the characters is a soldier. He uses a rifle. I mean, he has an ammunition system. So the more you can develop more skills to use different types of ammunition, and it obviously it consumes a turn because he has to load the gun. But then he has an elemental effect on related to which bullet you chose, which ammunition you chose. So he can do like massive damage if you know the elemental weakness of the enemy, you use the right ammunition, you can
Hmm.
do huge damage. But it kind of takes time. It takes a little bit of strategy to build up to that. I mean, I just there's 8 characters total. I tried to make two of them are a little bit more about buffs and debuffs. Um, like 3 of them are kind of more tanks
Hmm.
to varying degrees, and then the other 3, I guess, are more mages. Some tend more towards healing, some more towards damage output. Yeah, but they all. I wanted to give each character some like very useful skill as well. Like, oh shit, I have to give up this character to have this other one, but then I lose like a really important skill. Um, so you have to make a sacrifice because you only have 4 party members. So I wanted to make. Yeah, just wanted to give each character some really interesting and really useful skill, so that you have to make a decision about who's in your party. So if you're going to have Hashem in your party,
he has a lot of really cool debuff and buffing things, and he's the only character that can buff other characters' attacks. So he can make your mage character really powerful. He can make your main character really powerful. But also he doesn't have a lot of other skills outside of that, so he's more of a support character. But yeah, it depends. It depends. But tried to make all the characters have something really interesting to offer, so you can mix and match.
Mm-hmm. And having like each character be like unique like that again leads to some very interesting choices. And people will of course gravitate towards different play styles. Like for the people who play tested the game or people giving you feedback, what was kind of like? Did you get like anything in terms of like certain like character types or certain strategies people like try to like focus on?
I haven't gotten that nitty gritty with the feedback yet. I think because there were just some overall issues with balancing that I needed to work out. But I think as more people play the game and as I get more feedback, I'll hear more about specific approaches. I know that I've played the game for many hours, just testing things out, and I have a preferred party, but at the same time, then I'll try out a different thing, and I'm like, oh, that works really well too.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of like enemy balance or enemy design, this is again another very big point when it comes to RPGs is how much can the enemy or how do you design enemies to like counter these abilities? Again, like one of the most classic tropes of JRPGs is that bosses are immune to just like literally every like cool, debuff and skill that you have.
Yeah.
So like with Grand Soul Story, like how was it like designing like elite encounters, boss encounters, and kind of making that fit within your combat system?
I wanted to make them hard, obviously, rewarding to get through, and it's very easy to just turn off all the debuffs for the boss. Like, okay, this boss, nothing affects them. But I just went for a percentage approach. So like most of the time, you're going to miss blinding a boss, but occasionally you might get through. So it might be worth the effort because they hit really hard, but it's going to be a risk. So.
Okay.
That's the approach I tried to take, and I think the biggest challenge with the battle system is that I wanted to make a non-linear experience. So you can, have you ever played Gothic? It was like an old PC game.
Heard of it, but did not play it.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's maybe other examples of that, but basically, if you stay in the right area, you'll be fine. But if you go to an area that's above your level, you're going to get absolutely destroyed. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But the hardest part of the balancing is that it's sort of non-linear. So you can like miss a lot of battles and not level up if you want to, and then you'll end up later in the game, and it's like how do you mitigate the discrepancy? So. I just tried to make it so that some of the encounters that you have to have will give you a pretty substantial experience boost, so that the players, regardless of how they play, are going to at least be at a reasonable level for some of the later fights. But that was definitely a challenge, just because I love the idea of non-linear gameplay, and it's also part of the story because the game is a lot about choice. And not really like choice as a feature, like, oh, your choices affect the gameplay. Like that's always a promise that never, that developers never follow through on. Really, it's more that choice is a theme. It's like it's a narrative theme of the game about, how do you respond to things as a player, as a person. And I worked pretty hard to make some kind of compelling dilemmas, like what do you do in this situation? There's not a right or a wrong. There's just two different options, So I think I'm really, really attracted to the non-linear, choice-based player experience, but it makes the combat balancing challenging for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And as you said, with it being more non-linear, there's always that risk of, really important item over there, player goes over there, completely misses it, and then wonders, well, I'm too weak. How am I supposed to beat these enemies?
Yeah.
And again, it's go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was going to say that it's always why like that kind of like onboarding and pacing is so important in these kinds of games. Because you said like the intro is often where you'll lose a lot of people if they don't understand what they're trying to do, or they're not figuring out, okay, the quest wants me to go here, or why are these enemies just like pounding me into the dirt because I walked to the wrong side of the room. Again, like gamers will drive you crazy when it comes to onboard.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, something I do appreciate about gamers is they actually give you more of a fair shake than I feel like you get in other artistic realms. I feel like in music, it's so much more disposable because somebody can just play a song and then pause it, whatever. But video games, like by their nature, they take some more engagement, right? So I think gamers as people, they're more up for that. They're more up to like actually focus on something for a period of time. So I've coming from music, I've actually been like, oh my god, somebody wants to play my game for more than an hour. Holy shit, it's like a huge honor, But yeah, in terms of the onboarding, I just had like an opening sequence where you're in kind of an enclosed space and you have to learn how to do some things, and nothing terrible is going to happen. You kind of want to show at a small scale what the whole game experience is like, the tutorial level. I think there's some tutorials that just like they're extremely easy and they don't really reflect the game because then you leave and then it's like, oh, this is something totally different. So I wanted the tutorial to be kind of a microcosm of the whole experience, which is that you can make some choices. You're going to fight some dudes that might kill you, but you can be okay if you plan a little bit, if you search for loot, and so I feel like a good tutorial is a microcosm of the whole experience, and it kind of introduces you to what the game is about.
And the one thing I forgot to ask you about regarding the battles of Grand Soul Story, how long does like a typical like battle last? Because again, this is another big aspect of a lot of pacing. Some games you can just speed through a battle in like 5 to 10 seconds. Some of them can take like a minute to 2. We're talking like a big boss that could take 5 to 10. So I guess what was it like, or like what did you decide on for Grand Soul Story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I'm still making adjustments to. I want it to be pretty snappy. That there are some stressful moments. There are some longer battles. I personally don't like drawn out battle systems, so. So yeah, in terms of time, I guess like a normal encounter, maybe a minute or 2 minutes, probably more like 2 minutes, and a boss maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Yeah.
And you mentioned like loot, so I'm sure there's like equipables, new swords, weapons, whatever in Grand Soul Story. Did you go for kind of more like a linear progression as this is the bronze sword, then we have the silver sword, gold sword, or items more I guess like one-offs?
Yeah, it's pretty linear. It's like in the area that you're in, you'll find. I think this is again something I totally ripped off of Baldur's Gate 2, but I sort of took it to an extreme, which is that the game is a lot about managing money because there's finite money, and currency is it's how you progress the game. Basically, you're in the first area, you have to have 20,000 decas, which is the currency, to move on to the next area, to pay a bribe to let you through the city gates. And then there's another bribe you have to make in the second part, and that's 50,000 decas. And then at the end of the game, you have to buy an airship to leave this horrible place, and that's 75,000 decas. So the whole game is... You could technically soft lock yourself if you spent too much money, basically. And I wanted the player to have that option to feel like, oh, I actually have to be kind of mindful about how I spend money. And because there aren't random encounters, you can't just farm cash. You have to like be kind of mindful about how you spend money. So in that sense, I I think that makes the weapon purchases kind of interesting because you know that I have finite money. Am I going to get armor? Am I going to get a new weapon? Am I going to get trinkets that are going to boost some parameter? But otherwise, yeah. I mean, there's a couple hidden secret bosses, and they can give you really really good weapons. But otherwise, it's kind of vanilla. Just yeah.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Anything else like regarding like from your side about Grand Soul Story that we didn't discuss yet about anything art, music, gameplay, story, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting game because I think of it more as character driven storytelling than plot driven. And I think that's just my own personal taste in storytelling. Like like The Sopranos is one of my favorite shows, and it's not really a plot driven show. It's just about these assholes and how interesting they are. And so I think the game, because it's kind of modular, because it's non-linear, I focus more on the character interactions and their experiences, and a lot of the game is that you'll kind of step into the shoes of one of the other protagonists for a while. And like there's like I mentioned, Elsie, she's sort of one of the main characters, and she has kind of a mysterious backstory, but she's a drug addict, and you can choose to help her get sober or not. If you don't, there's a big story thread that you're going to miss. And if you do, then yeah, different things will happen depending on your choices. There's another character, Dumond, and he's kind of a spiritual seeker, but he's very unsure of himself because his culture is very passive. They're just like, you just let the universe do what it does. You don't need to get involved in things. But it's his nature that he cares very deeply, and he wants to like get in and fix things and do things and take action. So for all of the characters, I tried to chart like a character arc for them that you can follow or not follow. So that was a really important part of the storytelling, was that it's not necessarily, hero leaves the village and then goes and fights the dragon, and then you win. It's more like there's a lot of stuff you can do, but what really matters is the characters and what's going on with them psychologically, how they're changing or how they're not changing. So I guess that's kind of unique. I think, obviously the game has its limitations with the presentation, and it's an RPG Maker game, so there's just limitations to that. But I think what I tried to focus on was just the storytelling, having scenarios that are kind of unusual for RPG. There's a sequence where you kind of enter somebody's subconscious while they're meditating, have this dialogue back and forth with their inner voice, right? And so there's a sequence like that. There's a sequence where you play one of the soldiers, and he has to make on the battlefield about what you're going to do, and you're like at this table with these military generals sort of discussing what's going to happen on the battlefield. There's a guy that's like suicidal. He jumps off a bridge. You can choose to jump in and save him, swim in, like save him afterwards or not. I tried to include as many interesting scenarios as I could that maybe are not your typical JRPG fare. But I think that was inspired by some of the classics. Like I feel like that's something that's missing in modern games, is that older games are very playful. I think because they were made by just small teams of people, and video games weren't like some big industry, so they had more flexibility, more freedom. Like in Final Fantasy VII, there's just a lot of weird shit that you do. Like you cross-dress, and then there's some weird sequence with a dolphin at some point, and it's just weird. Like a lot of weird stuff happens, and I love that. I love the variety and playfulness. But then at the same time, it tells a very very deep and kind of emotional psychological story. So
Yeah. And I think like a lot of like the classic like JRPG format does like is very like ripe for having like interesting stories and discussions like this. Probably like one of the most famous examples would be something like To the Moon, which was built in. I think that was an RPG Maker game as well.
yeah,
That again like had no combat whatsoever, but told such an emotionally gripping story that it did shock people. And I think kind of like what we see from even like indie horror, like this idea that you can have a very wide berth of using the general format to do anything. You want your JRPG to be very combat mechanical focused, go for it. You want to be more story driven, you want like an Undertale like, do you want whatever. Like it's a very wide canvas for you to work in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Fear and Loathing is our RPG Maker game too.
Yeah.
That guy's a badass. It's a lot of work because he did all the art too, which is crazy. But I think you're right, and I think I actually feel like it hasn't. Well, like you're saying, it's ripe. It's ripe for exploration, and I think it's still ripe. I think it's still a genre that you could do a lot in, and I think a lot remains to be done. In terms of storytelling using that particular genre, I think a lot of cool things can be done, and I think that's what I tried to accomplish with this game is to introduce some new kind of narrative ideas, an approach to storytelling that's really character driven, as opposed to just being strictly plot driven.
Yeah. And the market, or like the consumer base, I think is receptive to that. Because one of the things I've been seeing, like looking at like the adventure game genre and strategy genre, is that those genres still seem to be very much like stuck in terms of like the older or kind of like the design that made it once popular, but they really, I think, struggled to kind of break through to like mainstream today. And I mean, as you were saying earlier with RPG design, kind of like the trend now is that the major studios are going for more action-oriented, more real-time, but the indie side is still keeping with more like turn-based, obviously 8-bit, 16-bit style. And like you said, like there's always going to be, I think, room for people to look for something different in this space. Because again, like the beauty of RPGs is that you can abstract anything. If you want an RPG about cooking, delivering pizzas, you can do that. You want, like emotional story about someone like feeding ducks in a park. You can do that as well. And I think it always will come down to the skill of the developer to make that feel meaningful to the player.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. And I think you see that. You see the variety in the output and yeah, what makes the difference between something that's kind of janky or amateur and something that's not is the skill of the developer and ability to tell that story or execute that vision, whatever it is.
All right. So I think with that, I am just about out of questions for you. So anything else that you would like to discuss before we kind of go into like final wrap up?
I don't think so. I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. It's something I feel really passionately about. I think I'm realizing how passionate about it I am. It's cool talking to somebody who's really put a lot of thought and a lot of energy and effort into discussing video games, and it's just kind of like it's reminding me like, wow, yeah, this is it's such an art form. It's such an art form, and it's very unique, and there is so much to discuss in terms of design and choices and what works and what doesn't work, and it's just gotten me excited, like thinking about it and talking to you about it. It's been really cool.
Yep. And again, thank you for reaching out and wanting to come on.
Yeah.
I guess to kind of start to wrap things up, one final like game dev question for you then is, as a sole developer, one thing I like to ask whenever I have a chance to talk to them, if I can remember, because we sometimes get into really long conversations, is what was kind of like the like easiest aspect of game development that you found, and what was like the most challenging aspect for you, like kind of like starting out and making your first game?
I think the easiest aspect is that I just is feeling motivated to do it. You know, I think maybe some people hit roadblocks in their motivation. For me, I just like, if I start thinking about my game at night, I can't sleep. Like it's just that exciting to to make a project.
Mm-hmm.
So the motivation was there. I think the difficulty, even as simple as RPG Maker is, kind of wrapping my head around, conditions, like if this happens, then this happens, and doing that in a non-linear game is very difficult, because it's like, okay, what if, and this is what I'm discovering now, what if the player does this thing first? That's going to totally complicate something over there, and you have to like, it's a lot of bug testing. Yeah, and I think I've another challenge has just been, I think kind of having my tail a little bit between my legs in that it is an RPG Maker game, and that has its own negative connotations, and there's people that are just like, well, it's not a real game, almost. It's like, if it's not made in the more serious software, it's not real, or it's not worthwhile or something. And yeah, I mean, the reality is I just, this isn't my full-time profession. I'm going to school, I work, I have a wife, and I as much as I would love to, I really just don't have the bandwidth to like learn Unity or something. And I also just wanted to focus on the stuff I can do well, which is writing, which is music. Hopefully telling a compelling story. But at the same time, a part of me is like, I used RPG Maker, and so yeah, I think that was a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge for me, is presenting this thing to the world that I really put my guts into, but also knowing that in some people's eyes it's just not going to be good enough because it's it wasn't made by by somebody that devoted their life to learning programming or something, which is incredible, and I respect that. I respect that a lot. I don't want to feel like I'm co-opting, or I'm kind of stepping in somebody else's world because I'm not a programmer, or because I'm not I don't have a background in game design. All I can say is like I put a lot of effort into it, and I'm continuing to put effort into it because I'm really passionate about it. And some people will enjoy it, and some people have enjoyed it, and I think there's a lot of good in it. I think I did a good job in a lot of areas, but there's other areas that are just limitations. I don't know what else to say. Like, it is what it is. But yeah, I think that's been a challenge. Yeah,
I think like the stigma of RPG Maker, I think that has been like slowly wearing off, or like maybe like the last like 3 to 4 years. Again, with games like Fear and Hunger, I think really showing people that it's all about kind of like the tools that you use rather than the tool itself being like the metric of quality. Because again, like I remember like 7-8 years ago, people were saying, if it's an RPG Maker game, it's crap. If it's a game made in Unity, it's crap. And people have had this kind of, I think there's been this kind of realization that no, you can do something fantastic in RPG Maker and Unity and pick any engine, but it really again comes down to what the person is trying to do. I mean, we can even look at this in like terms of game jams. There are some phenomenal concepts that have come from game jam start games or game jam start projects. And I mean, this could just be something with like all placeholder art, all, just like stick
Mhm.
figures. But if you
Yeah.
can do something different and unique and you can tell that or you can sell that to people, they'll
Mhm.
come with you, whether you are using, 4K full ray tracing graphics,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
if it's just, very simple pixel art or stick figures or 8-bit, 16, it doesn't matter what bit it is.
Yeah. I think that's it's a generous and I think it's a mature view. It's like yeah, it depends on how you. It's not the tool. It's how you use the tool and what you create with it. And um, I understand the stigma. I understand the kind of fatigue with it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's just kind of a double-edged sword. RPG Maker is more approachable. It's easier to use if you don't know coding, obviously. So that streamlines the development process, but at the same time, it's like some people are just going to see that and be like, I'm not interested whatsoever.
Yeah.
I don't care if it's the next Witcher 3. If it's made an RPG Maker, I don't want to play it. Yeah. So yeah, but I think that's really generous, and and I have gotten negative feedback from people. I have people like, oh, it's just a generic RPG Maker game, and it's totally crushing for like a couple hours, and I take it on and like, okay, it's I think it's a good exercise for the ego, just being in the public spotlight in any way. I'm sure as an author too. It's like you spend all this time, you put your heart into something, and then you put it out into the world, and it's anybody's guess how people are going to respond.
Oh, yes.
I'm sure you've had some experience. Yeah, I mean, there's people that hate The Godfather or hate, whatever other great movie or game, or you can write War and Peace, and there's going to be some dude on the internet that's like, "Fuck this book. This is boring. You're boring.
Yeah.
You suck.
It's too long."
It's too long." Yeah.
All right. So I guess my last question for you then for today is, do you have any ideas or plans for making like another game in the future at some point?
Yeah, and if I think if I did, I wouldn't use RPG Maker. But yeah, I have ideas for a sequel. This game, I think it depends on how it does. Yeah, I think for an indie game that I put a lot of time into, but pretty much no budget because I don't have a budget. It's actually going pretty well. It's selling a decent amount of copies for my metrics, and yeah, man, it's something I lose sleep over. So it's if you feel that fired up about something, there's I think it's probably a worthwhile endeavor to continue with. So yeah, we'll see.
All right. So, for people listening, do you have any like social media you want to mention? Sites, Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever.
No, just the Steam page. Just check out Grand Soul Story. See if it's something you're interested in. You can give it the good old Steam 2-hour challenge and see if you like it. And then if you don't, you can return it. Yeah, I mean, I have an Instagram. I have a music Instagram, which is Moon Soul Music. So if you like funk music and soul music and stuff like that, you can check that out. And yeah, no, but I think that's it.
All right. Well, Jeremy, it was great chatting with you, and again, like I say, like I always love to have these conversations, and I do wish you the best of luck for whatever comes next for you.
Thank you so much, man. It was an honor to be on your show, and I appreciate all the great questions. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. So, for everyone watching, we're going to wrap things up here for this week's episode. As always, do the YouTubing stuff. Check out the Discord and the Patreon. Support will go towards getting more daily streaming happening. Buy all the books I have. Buy all the RPG books that I have out there now. And I guess for you, Jeremy, do you have anything you'd like to send us out on? Like any like final thoughts? Anything you'd like to say to like people who enjoy the game? Just anything that you'd like.
No, I mean, I can give an inspirational message, I guess. If you find that thing that you lose sleep over because you enjoy it so much, go after it and persevere. Try to get better at it. And it's okay if there's setbacks along the way, or if it's not perfect the first time through. Just keep at it. I guess that's what I would say. That's what I've learned from this experience so far.
All right. So everyone, with that said, thanks again for tuning in, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. To our next show, take care.